Welcome again, everybody. It's Chip Rogers, President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you took part in our webinar series earlier this morning. This is part 2 of our ForWard two-part series for today as we celebrate International Women's Day. And I cannot think of a better, well, I guess maybe 2 or 3 better places in the whole world, but one of the best places you could ever celebrate it is at the Zena Hotel, which is where we're located today, right here in Washington, D.C., right off Thomas Circle. And it is a gorgeous day here in our nation's capital. And this hotel is just as gorgeous. If you get an opportunity, come see it. There's a lot of places that would be appropriate for today's programming. This might be the perfect place, as this hotel, particularly here in the lobby, has a women theme to it. And they've put a lot of effort into really making this special. So if you ever get a chance, come by here and take a look at this. It's pretty neat. With that, we're going to show you a little video about the Hotel Zena. Again, the Hotel Zena, a wonderful place to check out here in the nation's capital. Now, this is all possible because we have people who support us and organizations that support us. You can see here on the screen those who support our industry and support AHLA, but I want to draw your attention to 4 sponsors of this particular event: Brand USA, Guest Worldwide, Spencer Stewart, and Wells Fargo. We would not be able to do this today without their generous support. So we thank them for supporting, again, the cause that we're celebrating today, International Women's Day, but also throughout the year, AHLA and all that we do. And with that, I want to introduce this incredible group of leaders that we have. But let me set the stage first. Earlier today, in the first session, Rosanna Mayetta, the president and CEO of the foundation, hosted a group of leaders that are on the foundation board of trustees. I'm now hosting a group of hospitality leaders, female leaders, that happen to sit on our executive committee and our board of directors. I'd like to introduce them now. First, Heather McCrory, CEO for North and Central America for Accor. Lisa Cecchio, Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for Wyndham Hotels. Tammy Weinbaum, the Executive Vice President and of the Global Client Group for American Express. And Simone Wu, Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Choice Hotels. Ladies, thank you on this very special day for being with us. We appreciate you taking the time. We need to get Lisa's video up. Okay. Because she has the, well, maybe not the coolest backdrop. I think that's going to go to Heather today, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But look, all of you have made your way to the top. You are leaders in our industry, well respected. People follow what you do, and you're making a difference. But people don't start in leadership. There's always a path, there's a journey. And with that path and journey, there's always a unique story. I'd love to hear from each of you in about 3 minutes to tell us your story on how you ended up where you are today. And we're going to start with Heather. And Heather, before you even jump into that, if you could tell us what that background is that is making us also envious of at least something, a place that you would like to be.
Thanks, Chip. So this is Fairmont Mayakoba down in the Mayan Riviera. So wish I was there versus in Toronto, which is about -10 today. So it would be much nicer to be down there. And I thought I'd put this backdrop on there for that reason. So great spot. But in terms of my career, in 3 minutes or less, started in the laundry, worked my way up through the ranks, enjoyed every minute of it, kind of fell in love with the industry early on, and have moved up through the ranks through sales and marketing, then over to what I thought at the time was the dark side, but went into operations, and then back into the field, back to corporate office, and have been in Senior Vice President Operations, EVP Operations, CEO, now actually for 2 years, which I can't believe how time goes by so quickly, but love this industry. It's a great place to work and tremendous opportunities, but it's been a great ride so far.
Yeah, not that we had any similar paths, but we both became CEOs 2 years ago, and right. 2019 was a heck of a year.
That's right. That's right.
Let's switch to Tammy. Tammy, what about your story? How did you get where you are today?
Thanks, Chip. Yeah, so just thinking about a lot similarities to Heather. Really started with American Express over 30 years ago. So it has been quite a journey. I think, sometimes I would say it was easy. Sometimes it was hard. I started as a clerk in 1990 in American Express's Fort Lauderdale office, which happened to be right up the street from my parents' house. So my plan at the time was to get my job, get American Express to pay for my MBA, have this great company on my resume and move on. But clearly that plan didn't pan out. I've had 11 different roles. I've relocated with the company 5 times, and I've lived in really some great places from Florida to North Carolina, Phoenix twice, Salt Lake City, and about 5 years ago, moved to headquarters in New York and took on the role of executive vice president. And probably the majority of my career I spent in our servicing organization. And today I'm the executive vice president, Chip, as you said, our global client group, which really manages the relationships of some of our largest global merchants, including Choice, Wyndham, and Accor. And going back to whether easy is hard, I just found that sometimes along the journey, it was really jumping into opportunities that maybe weren't the most glamorous, or stepping into something that really maybe no one else wanted. And the growth that I got from those opportunities really helped me, I believe, get to where I'm at today. And then secondly, I would say is really about mentors and advocates, which I know we'll spend time talking about later, but having other people push me and be ambitious for myself is really what enabled me to be here today.
Your story really strikes me as interesting, because I think it's not necessarily unique that when you're young, you have a plan on where you're headed. And then different opportunities pop up. And if you're flexible enough to take those opportunities that you have, you can get to a place that maybe is a little different than where you anticipated to begin with. Let's jump to Simone. Simone, what about your story?
Sure. So I came to hospitality a little bit later. I actually started out, in a law firm, and I'm the general counsel of Choice today. But I was really doing telecom, regulatory, and transactional work. And then after that, for over 20 years, I was in the telecom and technology industry. But like Tammy and like you were saying, Chip, I took on some roles where I was uncomfortable. I moved from legal into the business side. At AOL, I had a completely non-legal role. I took on things that I did a startup. It didn't work out, but I learned so much from that. And eventually I became GC at the company that I was at before Choice, when the prior GC was retiring. And that opportunity came to me. I actually decided not to throw my hat in the ring. But at the time, the company was going through some transition, and said, hey, you know what, why don't we see if Simone will sit in as acting GC for a while we kind of figure out what we want to do. And I took the acting role, and then became GC, was there for 6 or 7 years. The company went private, and I was approached about taking on the Choice role by a recruiter. So completely sort of out of nowhere. I obviously had no hospitality or franchising experience, and you know what? It's been wonderful ever since. So that was in 2012. I'm so happy that I have joined this wonderful industry. I did have to do some catching up and learning, right there at the start, and continue to learn. But I think it's what you have already said, being willing to take risks, taking those opportunities when they come up. And yeah, hard work. I mean, you start out, you've got to be, willing to, get your hands dirty, and all along the way, keep learning, keep working, and keep gaining experience so that you can take on that next role where you don't have experience, where you, feel stretched and uncomfortable.
It's interesting you brought up the one thing that I hear so often from everybody in this industry, and that is, once you make it to hospitality, if you've been elsewhere, you're like, why didn't I come here earlier? Why didn't I? Like, this is where I should have started. Heather, of course, started there and made her way to the top. Lisa, what about you? What's your story?
My story, it's funny to hear you talk about just starting out in a certain way and then ending up in a completely different path. But before I even answer, I just want to wish everybody a happy International Women's Day. Chip, thank you and the team for even having us all together. It's been a wonderful day celebrating women. I'm glad we're in the 4 o'clock slot. We're bringing us home today. It's just been such a wonderful day celebrating, and I can think of no better way than to be with all of you today, and appreciate it very much. My story actually started My father came from the Philippines in the early 60s and to finish his medical degree. And he built up his own practice and he built up his own business. And so when I was born, I had the same initials as he did because I was going to be a doctor too. And I was pre-med all the way through to my freshman year of college when I started my pre-med classes. And I realized that it was his passion and not mine. And so I think back to one of the hardest job interviews I ever had, which was being in the car with him that summer after my freshman year and telling him that I didn't want the job. And him fully supporting me. And I think from that day forward, I really just chased my passions. And at the time I was playing tennis, and I started in professional tennis event management, which was a dream for someone who grew up playing tennis, and then made my way to the airline industry at JetBlue for almost 12 years, and then moved to hospitality at Wyndham about 5 years ago. And I think you're right, Chip. Once you're here, you wondered why you didn't start earlier, but very happy to be here now.
Well, I love these stories. And I think all four of you hit on something a little bit different, which could serve as an inspiration to just about everybody that's watching. And on that theme of inspiration, during normal times, being a leader such as yourself, a good part of that is inspiring other people to do those things that they probably didn't know they could do or think that they could do. And we all use positive reinforcement and helping people see kind of the glass half full to inspire people to do those things. But boy, the last year has been tough. It has been tough. How has your leadership changed? Has it changed at all during a time where it's very difficult to point to the positive, where things, the daily grind of the news is just bad, bad, bad. And yet you've got to continue to be that positive, inspirational leader. Lisa, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think that over the last year, if it's taught us anything, is the importance of the whole person. We talked pre-COVID about bringing your whole person to work and really kind of understanding what makes people tick and what makes them choose the jobs they have and what makes them choose the careers that they want. And, I think my style has always been people first. I pride myself on being a people leader, of really understanding what motivates people, what drives people, because I think if you can understand them as individuals, it really helps you to build a comprehensive and complementary team. And so I always try to lead with compassion and lead with empathy. And I think that over the last year, if there's anything that we needed more of, is that compassionate and empathetic leadership. And personally, I have 3 boys under the age of 10. So when I think about really being able to understand what so many families have gone through, and so many female leaders and their spouses, and male leaders and their spouses, and what it's been like to navigate a pandemic, while also picking up the role of teachers and coaches and mentors and, friends that your children may have had, pre-COVID. And then on top of that, aging parents that also live nearby, and making sure that they were well taken care of. And so I think, really understanding and having appreciation for what our teams were going through, because we were all going through it together. We talked about it a lot throughout the year on different panels, and we read about it all year round, that this was something that we all felt. And I think really being able to understand our people, what they were going through, what they needed from us as a company, I think really helped them to navigate through some of those very dark days.
Heather, what about you? We talked about the fact that just a moment ago that 2019 was just a phenomenal year for everybody. And then everything fell off a cliff. 2020 was the worst year for most people, particularly in our business.
Correct.
Has that changed your leadership style at all?
I don't know that it's particularly changed my leadership style, but maybe emphasized some of the key points that were strong anyway. And like Lisa, I think Lisa kind of covered a lot of the different areas, but the one thing I would add to that is communicating. To me, the biggest thing that I didn't, we've always communicated. As a leader, you communicate regularly. But in this case, you were communicating when you didn't know the answers, when you didn't know what was actually going to happen next, and showing that sense of vulnerability and making sure everybody felt comfortable that, we're in this together, we're going to work through it, we're going to figure it out as we go along, I think was incredibly important. And the other piece of that is I'm always been known for, and frankly have even been coached to be a little less so, but I am very much a straight shooter. And so the part of, I think, success through this COVID period has been just laying it on the table for everybody and making sure that everybody was aligned and understood. But in, like Lisa said, a very empathetic, a very compassionate way, because children are in your Zoom screens. People are doing things that they're just not used to. They're the ability to accommodate what's going on at home and actually at work, and you don't get to leave. So those things are all like that whole person, mental health. It's another area that I think that typically our company would not have spent a lot of time on, but we're spending tremendous amount more time on the whole person. It's not just about the pieces of the puzzle. It's kind of like, how can we help you be whole? And so to me, it's just brought those things more to the forefront, and probably I've been more vulnerable, if you will, in telling people that I'm not sure what's going on either, but we'll work it out together, more so than probably I ever have before in my career.
Simone, that's a perfect segue to my next question, Simone, and that is, during this time, it seems like as leaders, I know anytime you're leading a group, you feel the weight of the challenges that your individual team members have in their personal lives. Every good leader carries that weight with them. How have you been able to deal with that, with so many people having challenges that range from, finding daycare in a situation where maybe they have to go into the office, to, as Heather was pointing out, navigating through a multitude of Zoom calls with kids and animals and stuff running behind them, to the other extreme, and that is having people that they know, dear loved ones, get coronavirus and the challenges that come along with that. How have you been able to deal with just all the personal stories that people have, while at the same time having that optimistic leader outlook yourself?
Yeah, I think, Lisa and Heather have already touched on some of that. It is weighty. These issues that, we're all dealing with. I think this is the only time, certainly, probably, in decades, right, where there's been something external that's affected every aspect of our lives, people's work lives, their personal lives, as you said, their health, how their kids get educated, just all of the aspects of your lives have been completely turned upside down. So it is weighty. And look, the thing that I found that helps me actually both keep my optimism and hopefully is helping people as well is to listen, like first and foremost, just to spend time listening. And for me, it's everything from listening to my team members, to others in the industry, to our franchisees who are absolutely at the center of everything that we do. And for me, optimism comes from knowing that, we will get through this. And every little thing that we can do, even if it's just incremental, everything that we can do by listening, we can learn what those things are and help incrementally. It's one step at a time. I come from, an Asian American family. My parents came from China originally. And one of the things that my mom used to tell me is, you know what, if a big bowl of rice spills and you have to pick it up kernel by kernel or grain by grain, you can do it. You can get through that gigantic bowl of rice. And so sometimes it's just putting one step in front of the other, listening. Sometimes you're offering advice. Sometimes you're a sounding board. Sometimes you're taking action. And what I found that, even trying something can help. And if you decide it's not really making a difference, you can, pivot, you can do something else. But, being able to do something for me helps drive that sense of optimism, knowing that we will get through it. And, another thing I would just say is that I think all of us have to try to take a little bit of time for yourselves. It's like they say, on the airplane, you got to put on your oxygen mask first before you can help other people. And you really can't help other people if you're worn down. You can't maintain focus. You can't maintain optimism. You can't help other people. So I think it is just finding, whatever moments you have, whether it's, taking a walk or hanging out with the kids or playing with the dog or, getting out there in nature, whatever it is, just doing a little bit of that, that outside of work, something that you can help you regenerate.
It's a really good point. Tammy, what about you? As normal times would dictate, you would have a few team members that have personal struggles going on. As the pandemic dictates, just about everybody has some sort of struggle going on. How have you been able to handle that?
Yeah, I think a lot of what was stated is what we experienced too at American Express. I think when the pandemic hit, we sort of shifted priorities and we said our number one priority, as a senior leadership team is the safety and healthy of our colleagues, and everything around our actions supported that. And so for me, what, I think some folks already said is everyone was talking about what was going on in their personal lives. We all were experiencing it, and everyone felt like they could be open. And we really encouraged them to tell us how we could help them. If they were sharing, childcare duty with their spouse, let us know. We would work to shift schedules. If they needed other support, we were looking for the tools and resources. I think we alluded to, whether it be mental, whether it be physical, we provided new resources for our employees to help them through that time. So I think increased communication at all levels, being honest with our colleagues about where we were in a business perspective, sharing information. It was a challenging time, but we really heard from our colleagues that they appreciated the transparent communication, the frequent communication, and just connecting probably more often than we ever have with our colleagues.
That's a really good point. I think in a strange way, communication in some aspects has actually improved during this time. It's difficult not having the personal connection if you're not going into the office, but you get to see people in their true living environment sometimes, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? We were doing on our team, our weekly all staff calls that were calls. And then finally I realized it's a lot better if we could do these on video. And so I know that probably didn't make everybody happy, but we moved in that direction. And I think it's an improvement. I think it helps with communication. I want to switch gears completely here and talk about mentorship. With all good leaders, whether they had an individual mentor or whether they had multiple mentors, it seems like that's a common thread among successful leaders. And I'd love to hear from each of you about who your mentors were, and if in fact you still have mentors that you work with now that you've kind of reached the top. I'll start with Simone.
Sure. So sorry, I had to unmute there. Absolutely. I think, mentoring has been incredibly important for me all along the way. I think I mentioned earlier, just, changing industries. I had a number of wonderful mentors, both within Choice and just in the industry, to help me just get up to speed. And I think we do want to think about mentoring broadly, right? There are people that can mentor you in different ways about different things. So some may be subject matter experts. Some, mentors I've had are actually people that I started mentoring, but then because they have expertise or they just have a different perspective, I've found, it to be wonderful to be able to bounce ideas off of them and let them mentor me in certain things. So, I go back to this idea about caring and listening. And I think that that's really what mentoring is. It's caring about others professionally and having that mutual caring being, a part of your professional relationship. So you can find mentors across the board on all different types of topics and areas. And you probably want different mentors for different, for different aspects of your career, or, in order to help you grow in different ways. So, I've been very fortunate. I think in every job that I've had, I can say, I was able to find support from this person or that person, educate me on topics, to create a trusted core group where I could go to, benchmark ideas, all kinds of things.
Heather, what about you? Who are your mentors? Do you still have those mentors?
I definitely still have those mentors. And like Simone was saying, varying people at different times in my career. But in particular, there's been a few who I think have been phenomenally helpful. And still to this very day, I still push things by them, question, how does this figure, how does that work? And it's actually incredibly helpful. And I think that you have to find those people, and frankly, is a key component, I think, of being successful. I think you need to have people who you trust, who trust you, who will also know you pretty well and even push you a little bit. I know there's no doubt in my mind that without some of the mentors I've had along the way, I wouldn't be in this chair today. I wouldn't probably have stayed in sales and marketing, and it was only through one of my mentors that he convinced me that I could actually do something completely different, finish an MBA. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I thought I was going to stay in the swim lane of sales, marketing, revenue management, that area, and convinced me to go try being a regional vice president and general manager. But I really think that it's important that you surround yourself with what you need at different times, because then when I got into the hotel side of the equation, it was a whole different set of people, and the expertise and knowledge that you needed in F&B or whatever it might have been is a different side. And you keep those contacts and those relationships for a very long time. And I think it's incredibly important to our careers.
You bring up something so important about a really good mentor is not only going to tell you what you want to hear. Oftentimes they'll tell you what you may not want to hear.
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
and you've got to trust them, because without that trust, they're probably not giving you the value that you need.
Totally.
Tammy, what about you? Mentoring?
Yeah, similar. I feel like I would not be where I'm at today without all that support and guidance. And, I mentioned in my intro how I moved around, took different positions. I think as I contemplated relocations, it was not only a professional choice, it was a personal choice. And so mentors gave advice and guidance. And I remember one time particularly, I was contemplating a position in Salt Lake City. I was based in Phoenix, quite happy. Family was very happy. The job was going great. And my mentor was giving me advice and guidance, but knew it was a big decision. And she helped me really spend some time. We happened to have a senior leader coming from headquarters. And she said, you know what, I have an idea. And she kind of created this opportunity for me to drive the senior leader from our office to the offsite that night to get a few minutes to get another perspective from someone, a senior leader in headquarters. And I kind of put this situation out there, and it was incredible advice. And I remember going home that night and saying to my husband, I have clarity on what we need to do. And it's a small example of how mentors are there for you, give you different guidance, support, and advice that help you.
Lisa, what about you? Mentoring?
Sure, and I just want to apologize we lost a tooth in our house, hence all of the excitement that is everyone around here. This is just the stuff, Chip, that doesn't happen when you're in the office. You just don't know when you lose a tooth. So you've all witnessed all the excitement that happens around here. Just never know what you're going to get on a Monday afternoon. I think some of my best mentors have actually come from my junior teams. I do skip levels all the time. I spend time with our entry level positions, and in my airline days and now my hotel days, the frontline operations teams. I think I feel like I'm constantly learning from them. You really get a sense of the health of an organization, the strength of a culture when you continue to kind of stay within the teams itself. I think there are times where you can kind of find yourself speaking to certain people at a certain level, and you may lose sight of how it's trickling down, or you think you're communicating and you think you're being clear, but you realize that as you kind of maybe get into some of the other levels that it actually isn't resonating, or it's been a little bit of a game of telephone. And I find that, also when you think about how big or small a problem is, a problem really gets felt in the working teams. And so I think it's always helped me to really kind of keep a pulse on the organization, the pulse on the culture. And again, especially as we come through a year like we've had, it's really helped me to stay in touch with how our people are feeling and how our teams are feeling. And, I also think it's an opportunity to really identify talent in an organization. I find that some of these conversations that I've had with people that I may have not have crossed paths with just because they may not be on my own team, or they may not be in a project that I've been working on with them. It's given me an opportunity to learn more about their backgrounds. And while they may be sitting in a revenue management role or a communications role or a sales role, they actually have a long history or a lot of experience in some other aspect of our business. And so it actually helps me to also potentially sponsor and mentor them as they move into new projects and tap them for special projects, or as roles come up in the organization, because I've spent that time with them.
I got to say, Lisa, I've been doing some form of broadcasting, television, radio, and now internet for more than 25 years. I've never had someone lose a tooth during a broadcast. So
It's never been done before.
You handled it with impeccable grace.
Oh, well, thank you.
No one would have known.
Lots of excitement.
Yeah. I'm going to go off script here for a second, as I promised all of you that I would do at some point. And I'm going to go to Tammy because she's brought up this issue a couple of times. And I think it would be really interesting for people to hear how you as leaders have handled the challenge of relocation. And when I mean relocation, either relocation geographically, where you yourself or your family are having to move to a completely different location, like Tammy, you mentioned a few times, or relocation to another industry where you're leaving your comfort zone to go to something brand new. How have you handled that during your career? Because I think people who sometimes see those, they see those opportunities and they're just not sure they want to do it. But all of you have done it in some facet. And I'd love to hear more about that. I'll start with you, Tammy.
Yeah, so thanks, Chip. I mean, I think you said early on, to me, I never would have thought that I would have relocated 5 times. I grew up in Florida, my family's in Florida. And as a matter of fact, when I got married, I remember saying to my husband at the time, just so you know, I plan on spending the rest of my life in Florida. And so for me to go back to him a few years later and say, there's an opportunity in North Carolina, what do you think? Should I put my name in the hat? You know, no one ever expected that. And so I always tell people never say never, but the opportunity was really one that I knew was going to be great for me from a career perspective. I have 3 children at the time. I had 2 boys that were very, very young. And I just felt like from a family perspective, it could be a good change for us as well. So I think to your point, Chip, it's really about looking at both your professional decisions and how this helps your career. And then what does this mean for the family? And a lot of the moves, I would say early on, they were great for the family because when you move to a new location, and a lot of these, we had no family, we had no friends, we didn't know anybody. It was just about the 4 of us initially, and then the 5 of us. And so we spent a lot of quality family time because it was about us. We've lived in a lot of great places. So, you know, I think you do have to look at it both ways. What does it do for your career? And what are some of the positives for your family as well?
It's a really interesting point that those changes actually brought you together out of necessity. I love that. Heather, what about you? You're not changed industries, but you've moved in quite a few places.
Yeah, I've moved 6 times. I was just thinking about it as Tammy was speaking, going, okay, how many times have I actually moved for my career? And I would agree with kind of echo everything that Tammy said. I think you have to look at both sides of the equation. What does it mean to you, to your family, and what does it mean for your career? But I also do believe it fast tracks your career a little bit. I think it actually helps to find out those different scenarios, and particularly in the hospitality industry, because different areas and different parts of North America, Mexico, wherever it might be, they are all very different geographic areas in terms of different dynamics of what's happening in those marketplaces. So each stop along the way, you learn tremendous amount about what's going on in that particular area. I would also say that kind of back to the mentoring, but even in terms of networking, you also widen your network considerably because you work with all these people in all these different industries or different areas along the way. And it really does help. And you don't even realize it at the time, but you're actually kind of gathering people along as you go. And to this very day, I can't think of a person along the way that I still don't keep track of from 30 years ago. So there's all sorts, not everybody, by the way, but certain people who had meaning in your life. So it really does have a significant positive upside. And I think it actually just adds to your value, and it adds to your knowledge level, I think is probably the best way to put it. So to me, it's a great thing. It's never easy. I would say that. And it's always, and I think Tammy touched on that too. You go to a place, you don't know anybody, you're starting from scratch, and you kind of get into that mode, but it's not the same as staying in one place for 15 years or 10 years or whatever it might be. But it's great to do. And I think it's something I would highly recommend.
Lisa, what about you? You've moved places, you've moved careers, industries. How has that been?
I have a lot of my movement came prior to me getting married and having a family. So a lot of my move, you know, I'm originally from New Jersey, moved to Washington, D.C., was there for several years, moved to Florida, moved to California, and then kind of moved back to, my family is here in New Jersey. My husband's family is here in New Jersey. And so I always knew that I would settle here. So it really, but I have to agree. I think the living in a different place for any length of time, even if it's just a few months, it does give you a sense of that place. You know, you learn some of the local cultures and some of the, you know, the best places to eat or the local grocery stores or local attractions. You get to meet people that live there. It just expands your horizon, especially it being in the travel industry. I mean, we always wind up in a different place. And, you know, even as we're just traveling for vacation with our families, and to be able to kind of tap into people that you've met along the way, you know, you like to have friends in all these different places. And in my JetBlue days, I mean, we were on airplanes, you know, every week, you know, opening new cities and finding new places. And so I felt very fortunate, even though I didn't live there necessarily, to be able to spend a week, 2 weeks at a time, to visit cities multiple times in a short period of time. You get to live a little bit like a local, and really understand the people. And I think that's the beauty of travel and the beauty of this industry. And then when we finally moved back and settled into New Jersey, while, you know, I didn't necessarily move to a different place. I had about a 2.5 hour commute each way to my office because my husband refused to leave New Jersey. So we lived, if anyone's familiar with New Jersey, the Hudson River separates New Jersey from New York. We lived in Hoboken, and I was working out basically at JFK Airport. So it was planes, trains, and automobiles to get there, but it was worth it for me at the time. And it was worth it to put the time in. And I did that commute with all my pregnancies, and all those babies traveled more than most people did. But it was time that I wanted to spend, and it was important to me. And even in having that commute, you just get to see so much life. I got to see New York City every day. I got to be on the subways. I got to be on airplanes. I got to see so many other aspects of culture and language and food. And that, I think, you know, you pick that up along the way. It doesn't necessarily have to be because you lived in one place, but exposure to new places and new people and new language, I definitely, it's been a big influence in my life, and I would absolutely recommend it.
Well, I know that area fairly well. Your husband owes you for making you go from Hoboken
I've kept a list,
to
Chip.
JFK. That's brutal. Simone, what about you? Changes, relocations, how have you dealt with it from a decision-making process?
Yeah, so, you know, like Tammy said, I think along the way, I've always thought about what does this mean for my career, for my family. I haven't moved too much geographically. I think I've moved twice, fairly early in my career, actually. So before the kids were in school or anything like that, before 4 kids, actually, I think. You know, for the most part, I think those decisions have to come from the gut. But you also have to be open, right? Because if you're not open to new things, or you're not really thinking about, well, what is this, you know, what can I learn from this experience? What can I, you know, what will I gain from going to this new place or taking this new role? What will I learn from doing a startup when, you know, maybe my job is pretty good? Like, why should I do a startup? And all of these different changes, these opportunities that present themselves, really, you know, being open to that. I think I try to be. One of the best pieces of advice, actually, going back to one of my mentors, was to say, you know, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you try this? You know, and kind of thinking about it from the other way, because it was easy to think, well, it's going to be great. But then, you know, deep down, there might be a little bit of, well, what does this mean for my family? Or what does this mean, you know, if I, you know, go into a whole different industry or something like that? And, you know, you really have to think, well, I could learn so much, and here's what I have to offer as well. And I think those are, you know, the types of things that I always thought about is, what can I offer? What can I learn? And, you know, frankly, how much fun is this going to be? And for me, I think, you know, as you said earlier, obviously landing in hospitality has been the best thing that ever happened. And why didn't I do this sooner? But, you know, you know, the sense of fun and, you know, getting that kind of energy from doing something new, you know, I think that's a huge driver for me.
Yeah, you really bring up a great point there, Simone, about that feeling of new. And that's one of the things I love in the hospitality industry. I hope everyone would agree. It's a new day every day. There's always something different. I'm sitting in this beautiful lobby of a new vision for what a hotel can be, and it's really cool. And it's something I would have never thought of, but it's nice to experience it. I want to switch gears here and talk about the impact of the pandemic on our workforce. And look, the list of things that are bad that have come out of this pandemic is 1 to 1 million, right? And one of those is the fact that twice as many women have left the workforce as have men. And these are oftentimes career decisions, family decisions, many of the decisions we just started talking about, or we've been talking about over the last few minutes. But also, people being let go is just part of this process, and it is a painful part of this process. I'd like to throw out this question about how have you dealt with this really difficult part, being a leader of having to restructure, changing the makeup of your team? How have you dealt with that? And Simone, I'll start with you.
Well, there's no more difficult decision, I think, than those that impact people, because, and that's just full stop. This past year has been very hard on this industry. It's been hard on our people, on our companies. And like everyone here, I think, we've all had to tighten our belts, and we all have had to impact people that we care about, knowing that that impacts their families, knowing that it impacts the community. And, the way that I've tried to do this is to be as thoughtful as possible to heighten the communication, the support for each other, to increase the cadence of our conversations. And there are, it's Zoom, but whether it's a one-on-one or a team meeting or daily touch bases, really increasing those opportunities to talk, and not only about the business topics of the day, but about how we're doing. And this has already been touched upon during this conversation, but we really have to know how everybody's doing. And I want to know, what can I do to help? What can the company do? Is there some flexibility that you need? All of those things. And I think we've done, a good job with that. We've tried to be as thoughtful as possible and support people to help them navigate, because, with the impact on the teams, it also means that for the people that remain, that there are, more things to be done. It's harder to prioritize. There's just more pressure on team members generally. And this is on top of all of the other things we already talked about, the pressures at home and all of that. And continue to listen. That's just sort of, I think, the number one responsibility that we have as leaders.
Lisa, what about you? Tough decisions have had to be made over the last 11, 12 months. How have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no harder decision to make than impacting somebody's livelihood, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I think for us, what we tried to do is to be as honest as we could feel. And this came from the top, from Jeff to our executive leadership team and through our leadership to be honest about how we were feeling and to be compassionate and empathetic to the situation, because it could have been easily anyone at that point. We made the decisions the best that we could at the time that we were making them. And I think what we said all along was, it's a very small industry. Opportunities will come back. It's important to keep the relationships alive and to just reach out to them. People who are being impacted, to call them and check on them and tell them you were thinking about them and tell them that they're sorry that it was happening to them, but we were going to stay in touch. And if we can connect them to other roles, while our industry was very, badly impacted, as we've talked about so many times, so many other industries were not. And, there are very transferable skill sets in our industry. And we were able to offer that to anyone that we can. And Wyndham actually had relationships with some of those retailers as a way to help to place some of the team members that we were impacting. And so it was really a proactive approach to the people that were being impacted. And for the teams that remained, it was open and honest conversations about how they were feeling, how I was feeling, how our leadership team was feeling about it, and really taking into account the impact of the smaller teams. We were hearing over and over again, I hear you telling me I should be taking PTO. I hear you telling me that I should be taking a break, but because we're all virtual and because the teams are so much smaller and my responsibility is so much larger, every time I try to take a break, even if it's for an afternoon, I feel like I'm still being called into Zoom calls, or I'm still being called into something. Or if I take an afternoon off, I've missed so much and then I'm behind. And then there was that fear, if I get behind, then maybe, I would maybe impacted. And so we actually instituted year-round summer Fridays. We always had a half day Friday, a 1 o'clock dismissal in the corporate offices that we've brought in now year round as our office still remains closed, as a way to just alleviate some of the pressure in the week. And if our corporate offices are closed, it helps to alleviate some of the global offices as well, because they know that they can take some breaks. And we've also instituted something we call a Be Well Day, where we close the corporate offices one Friday a month as a way to just give us all just a mental health break. And you know, that's something that we're even trying to think about and work with our hotels on to see how we can continue to kind of push that out through the organization. But for our corporate teams, this sense of wellness and mental wellness, and really just helping our team members to take that deep breath when we all needed it the most and continue to need it, and then come back and ready to work.
Tammy, I want to switch gears slightly, but really around the same topic, and that is the workplace has changed. I mean, dramatically changed. You know, we were in the midst of expanding our office. In fact, our new expanded portion of our office opened up officially on February 15th of last year. Could not have picked a worse day, right? But now you go into most offices, particularly here in an urban setting like we are in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure in New York City quite similar, and many of the offices are sitting, you know, 80% vacant. These changes are significant. The role of people's jobs has changed. Where they work has changed. Are these changes good? Are they bad? Are they permanent? What are your thoughts?
You know, I think there's some good to it. I think that, you know, you were saying earlier, Chip, right? The connection and being in person, you know, I don't know if Zoom will ever replace that. So I think there are times where you want to get together, but I think for now, the way that we're doing it is important to make sure that we understand what are some of the balances. And I think it is easy to be on calls all day because your office now is in your room or your house. And we really have to let people make sure that they create those boundaries so they are taking that break for themselves. They are taking vacation, even they might not be traveling somewhere as beautiful as Heather's background is, but it's important to them. So, you know, I think it's important that we recognize that. I think there is some good out of it. You know, I think as we're going through this, we're recognizing all the demands that, you know, women and men have on their plate. And I think flexibility is going to continue, has been, and will continue to be even more critical as we transition either back into a work, you know, building or the future. And so what I've said to, you know, colleagues I work with is talk to your leader, what works for you, what flexibility you need. It doesn't have to be a company decision. It could be a leader that makes that decision to be more flexible. So now's the chance to speak up and speak out and make sure your leader's working with you so it can be a positive change for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Being able to make those, as a leader, being able to make those individual decisions on how you work with individual employees to maximize not only their efficiency, but what they need in their life. You know, Heather, I think that was a question that so many leaders struggled with about this whole idea of working remotely. Obviously, that question was forced, or that answer was forced upon all of us. But does it change your workplace? Is Accor going to look like Accor looked in 2019 ever again?
Frankly, I don't think so. I believe that this pandemic, one of the silver linings of this pandemic is the fact that it's actually proven that we can all be quite productive when we're at home. And I think that provides phenomenal flexibility for women with children. I think that's so much easier for them to not have to do that commute and be at home. Or in a lot of women in our case, and Accor, they'd actually like to be at work so that they can have some quiet time from the family or the children. So it's kind of what Tammy was saying. I think this flexibility, this ability, that there's no concern any longer that what you're doing wherever you are. I think this ability to work wherever you are, from your home, from different destinations even, I think is actually a tremendous asset to our industry. And so something that's positive that's come out of this. I also do think, though, they're 100% like anybody else, getting together with your team is incredibly important. And so we've all been relying on years of relationship ability that's been out there, but as each month rolls by, that becomes more and more difficult. And so I think this ability to get together, Zoom just doesn't cut it. It's great. It's been a phenomenal tool, or whatever you use, but it is not getting away from actually being together. And I don't say that as a hotelier and I want people to be in our hotels meeting. I say that really truly because I think that you have to have that human connection, and that's where you continue to build that relationship with people and move on. So I really fundamentally do think it's changed. I think it's positive. And we are already talking about it. Is it like, okay, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, you come into the office because we need to have 3 concrete days where you can actually get together and have meetings. And then maybe it's you have the 5 days at home, or switching it up, kind of like Tammy's talking about. Maybe that doesn't work for other people. It'll just be incredibly flexible, probably more flexible than we would ever dreamed being before, and make it work for people. And I think that's great for our industry. Harder in the hotels, obviously, for all the reasons we all know, but in the corporate offices, I think it's definitely something that we're going to make work. I would just add one other thing that I think is an incredibly important thing on Zoom that we've implemented, and it's frankly, it's not something I would have thought was that I would do, but it's actually been very, very good. We have taken the first 10, 15 minutes of every call now, and we call it talking time kind of thing. It's kind of like water cooler, what's going on. And there's no agenda, there's nothing that we're talking about specifically, but it's just kind of like, how was your weekend? What happened? And what's going on? And initially we're all kind of like, okay, this is a complete waste of time. What are we doing? And then as it's become more and more of a natural thing for us, is what we all would have done if we were at the meeting early. It's a kind of like putting that normalcy back into what we're doing. And I highly recommend it because it is a bit awkward at the beginning, but it actually is a great practice that I think makes people feel a little bit more normal in the Zoom environment we're in.
Well, I think you raise a really good point there as well, Heather. The fact that virtual meetings, I believe, are successful because we all have a personal relationship for the most part with those people that we're meeting with virtually. Like all of us on this call right now, we've all met each other in person, right? And that helps us have a better virtual relationship. If it were only virtual, I think that would be difficult, which is why I think that balance you talked about, Heather, of having some time to meet in person is critically important, because then the virtual nature actually, I think, works better. Well, we could keep going on and on. The clock is ticking fast. That first 51 minutes went by really quick. So I'm going to go to our final question here. Today is International Women's Day. It's a day, hopefully, that everybody is celebrating. You are leaders in our industry. You also happen to be women. What's your outlook moving forward for women in the workplace, but more importantly, women in leadership, and more specifically, women in leadership in our industry? And Heather, I'll start with you.
Well, that's a great question. I actually think there couldn't be a better time for women in management and leadership positions. I think that there are so many young women coming up through the ranks. I know in our organization, we have 50-50 in terms of all levels up until the most senior level, which we're definitely working on. In our corporate office in Toronto, I actually have 47% women, though, who are in the senior leadership positions. And I just think that there's such, and I don't say this as a female, I say this just as a person. I think there's so many more phenomenally talented women who are coming up through the ranks and who haven't left the industry for whatever reason. And so this is a phenomenal time. And I also believe with everything that's happened in the US and everything that's happened globally, there's just a diversity and inclusion, and having the fundamental belief that you need to have people represented at the table is something that we all buy into. I think it is, it's never been as prevalent as it is now. And we know that our board table needs to replicate our customers and our colleague groups, and it's understood. And I just don't think it's ever been as clear as it is today. And I think that provides phenomenal opportunities for women of the future.
I would certainly agree with that. Lisa, what are your thoughts? The future for women in leadership, particularly in our industry?
I think it's very bright. I really do. I think if we've learned anything over this last year, it's that we can be flexible. You know, I think the way we used to think about having to be in an office 5 days a week, having to be in a certain role, having to be visible in order to be seen or to be tapped or to be promoted. I think what we've proven is that you can do it even in a remote environment. I think one of the silver linings of being in a fully virtual environment is the visibility of our field teams, of our hotel teams, of our sales leaders that are in the field, of our international leaders that we see now almost every single day, where before we may have waited for that annual meeting or that twice a year trip to be able to see them, and not only to see just their leaders, but to see their full teams. And it's just given us the opportunity to meet so many more people in our organization and across our industry. And I think this concept of flexibility that we've been talking about, just the idea of, we've shared today, our paths are all very different. This is such a broad industry with so many different roles that you can take. And I think that what we've proven and what I hope we continue to prove is that this is an industry for women and men. It is particularly for women who are supporting their families, who need, certain roles or responsibilities or flexibility in order to do that. And I think, to even just all be together today, recognizing International Women's Day and having conversations. I mean, everything that we've talked about in the last year about D&I efforts, it starts with having the conversation. And I think, us just having it today and continuing this and continuing it broadly at the industry level, in our own companies, in our own teams, with our one person at the Zoom water cooler, that's how I think we will continue to move it forward for us all.
Tammy, what about you? Probably a little bit different perspective. American Express, obviously a global brand in financial services. What's your outlook on women in leadership anywhere, but particularly in financial services?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Lisa and Heather. I'm quite optimistic. I think the fact that we're having this conversation, a meaningful conversation, and people and organizations are committed to helping women and being more flexible. I think it's an incredible time. If I was starting my career, I would tell women to speak up, speak out, because you have an opportunity to help kind of mold the workplace of the future and help your peers be successful. So I'm very optimistic.
I've got a 21-year-old daughter who is graduating from college this year, and she's just about to take that first step. Hopefully she's watching this today, but I think she actually had class. But that's why we have it on video, so she can watch it again later. Simone, you have the final word here. Optimistic, hopefully, about where women are in leadership?
Yeah, I'll make this unanimous. Absolutely optimistic. I too have some daughters and their 20s and starting out, and I watch them and I see where they are. And, the future is so bright. Heather mentioned the silver lining of the pandemic. And actually, Lisa and Tammy touched on that as well, which is the greater flexibility. But what it is I think, for choice, for example, we've talked a long time and encouraged people to bring their whole selves to work and create that sense of belonging, right? It's diversity, it's inclusion, it's equity, it's that sense of belonging. And what has happened is, work has been brought to you at home. Like the work has been brought to your whole self instead of you bringing your whole self to work. And we've all gotten used to seeing, people's pets and kids and, whatever's happening, people losing their teeth. That's wonderful. That's real. That is so authentic. And that shows how the way work gets done now, how it gets done, it's flexible, it's different. And I think we've all come to accept it and understand it, and even more than that, embrace it. Because how do we go on? Well, it's recognizing that people need flexibility, they want to be appreciated, and they want to work, they want to contribute. And how do we enable that? That allows men and women to have like all the different parts of their life, I think, come together in a way that, 30 years ago, when I first started out, honestly, when I first started out at a law firm, we weren't supposed to wear pants to work. Like we're supposed to wear dresses or skirts only. So it was a long time ago. I'm very optimistic. I think that, the future is bright for women and for men in the hospitality industry.
Look, I cannot thank the four of you enough, not just for spending time with us today, which has been so wonderful, but your leadership in our industry, which makes a positive difference every day, whether we're having webinars or not. Your leadership is making a difference. So thank you so much for what you do for all of us. I also want to take this time, if we could go to the next slide, to thank our sponsors. Without them, this would not be possible. Brand USA, Guest Worldwide, Spencer Stewart, and Wells Fargo, along with the rest of the sponsors you see here on the screen. They are what financially make this viable for us. I want to thank the incredible people here at Hotel Zena. This is a beautiful place. And if you're in Washington, D.C. area, come by and take a look at it. Now let's look at our upcoming events. On May 11th, this is really cool. I think everybody, I'm especially going to make sure my youngest 15-year-old daughter, who is who is an avid soccer player, is taking time out of her day to watch this one. Our ForWard event, which was going to be held in Chicago in person, is not obviously going to be in Chicago in person. We are going to have an in-person event, as you can see there on the right side of the screen, at the lodging conference later. But on May 11th, we're going to have our next ForWard event. Please take part in this, because we're going to have Jill Ellis, the all-time winningest coach in U.S. soccer history, and she will be with us. The U.S. women's team certainly captured the imagination of the world just a couple of decades ago and really raised soccer globally to a place it had not been before. And to hear some of her thoughts on that are going to be fantastic. So please join us for that. And then, of course, ForWard in person. Yes, it will be a hybrid event, but we would love to see everybody in person at the lodging conference on September 29th and 30th in lovely Phoenix, Arizona. That's always a nice time to be in Phoenix, but especially in late September. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Until next time, I'm Chip Rogers with AHLA. We appreciate all you do for us.
Thanks so much, Chip.